At exactly noon, the entire street heard the crack like a rifle shot, and then my 100-year-old oak started to fall. I didn't have time to scream before that massive trunk slid off the flatbed and slammed straight into Sheriff Tom Alvarez's house across the corner. And standing there with a pink clipboard like she was calling plays in a football game was Brenda Whitman, the HOA president, blinking like this was all still routine landscaping. Let me rewind, because I swear this didn't start as some neighborhood catastrophe. It started as one stupid piece of paper, and a woman who thought the Homeowners Association was her personal kingdom. My name's Jason Reed, and I moved into Maple Ridge Estates thinking I'd finally found quiet. You know the kind of place: neat lawns, identical mailboxes, friendly waves that last exactly 2 seconds. Right in my front yard was the reason I bought the house in the first place. A giant old oak, the kind that throws real shade in the summer and makes the whole property feel established, like it has history. Then Brenda showed up. The first time I met her, she smiled too hard and said, "Welcome to Maple Ridge. We take community standards very seriously." She had that tone like she was being polite, but also warning me, and that clipboard tucked against her chest like a badge. 3 days later, at exactly 12 p.m., I got my first violation notice. Not for trash cans, not for paint color, for my oak tree. The notice said my tree disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Visual harmony. Like my yard was a museum exhibit and my oak didn't match the theme. I emailed the HOA, calm and professional, attached a photo, asked what exactly they wanted. Brenda replied within 10 minutes, and it read like a court order. Trim it or remove it. 14 days. Non-compliance will result in fines. I stared at my screen like, did she just casually tell me to remove a 100-year-old tree because it doesn't vibe with the street? So I did what any normal person does when an HOA starts acting bold. I went looking for paperwork. Turns out that oak wasn't just old. It was protected. Heritage status. The county had it listed. To touch it, you need a permit, an inspection, and public notice. I printed everything like a nerd with a grudge and walked over to Brenda's house. She opened the door just enough to keep the chain on, glanced at my papers, and smiled like she was humoring a toddler. Protected, she said, doesn't mean untouchable. I said it means you can't just order people to cut it down. She tilted her head and hit me with the classic Brenda line. The Homeowners Association has authority to maintain community standards. Authority, that word was her favorite toy. After that, it got weird in a very specific way. The inspections started. Suddenly, HOA board members were walking the neighborhood and somehow always ended up lingering near my yard. I'd get emails with photos taken from angles that were a little too close for comfort. Then one afternoon, I pulled up my security camera feed and I watched Brenda step into my yard like she owned it. No knock, no call, just straight through the side gate. She reached up, grabbed the camera housing, and rotated it slowly until it pointed at the sky, like she didn't even care if I knew she was doing it. I ran outside and said, "What are you doing?" Brenda didn't flinch. She said, "Maintenance check, HOA protocol." Protocol, sure. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared of Brenda as a person, but because I realized something way worse. If the HOA was comfortable walking into my yard and messing with my security camera, then this wasn't about landscaping. This was about control. The next day, I called the county office and confirmed again that the oak required permits for any cutting. I documented everything, screenshots, email timestamps. I even wrote down the exact time she contacted me. And here's the part that still gives me chills. Almost every message from Brenda landed at 12 p.m. on the dot, like she wanted noon to feel like her daily announcement, like church bells, but mean. Then came the day I walked out at 12:01 p.m. and the shade was gone. I'm not exaggerating. The yard looked brighter, hotter. Wrong. I turned and my stomach dropped. The oak was gone, not trimmed, not maintained. Gone. All that was left was a jagged stump, leaking sap sawdust, sprayed across my grass, and deep tire marks, like someone had dragged a body out of a crime scene. I stood there frozen, and behind me I heard Brenda's heels on the sidewalk. Click, click, click. She said, "It looks so much cleaner now." I spun around and my voice came out sharp. "You cut down my tree." Brenda's expression didn't change. The Homeowners Association took action due to non-compliance. I said, "That tree is protected. You needed permits." She shrugged like I'd complained about the weather. "We handle community issues internally." And I swear in that moment my anger didn't even feel hot. It felt heavy. Because what do you do when someone does something that outrageous and then acts like it's normal? For the first time since moving into Maple Ridge, I had this ugly thought. Maybe I should just sell the house. Maybe I should walk away before this turns into months of legal bills and stress and sleepless nights over a clipboard tyrant. And then right on cue, I saw a patrol car roll up. Sheriff Tom Alvarez stepped out, took one look at the stump, and his jaw tightened so hard I thought he'd crack a tooth. "What happened?" he asked. I didn't give him drama. I gave him facts, permits, heritage status, video of Brenda rotating my camera, emails, times. He nodded once and said, "This isn't an HOA dispute anymore." That sentence did something to me, like a switch flipping from helpless to focused. We were still standing there when we heard the engine. A flatbed truck turned into our street, and on it, strapped down with chains, was my oak, or what was left of it. A massive trunk branches hacked off looking like a trophy. Brenda was walking beside the truck like she was leading a parade. Sheriff Alvarez held up his hand and yelled, "Stop the vehicle!" Brenda shouted back, "It's being relocated." Relocated, like it was a sofa. The driver hesitated, and Brenda snapped something at him that I couldn't hear. But I saw his foot hit the gas. Everything after that happened fast. The flatbed jolted. The chain on the trunk went taut. There was a metal squeal that made my skin crawl. Then bang! One of the chains popped loose and snapped sideways like a whip. The trunk shifted heavy and unstoppable, sliding toward the edge of the truck bed. I yelled, "Stop, stop!" The driver slammed the brakes, which was the worst possible thing. The trunk kept moving. It rolled. It rolled off the flatbed like a falling planet, crushed the curb, and went straight through the corner of Sheriff Alvarez's front fence, and then into his house with a sound I'll never forget. Wood, brick, glass, all at once. The street went silent for half a second, that kind of silence, where your brain tries to pretend what it just saw isn't real. Then people started screaming. Someone dropped a phone. Somebody yelled, "Call 911," even though we had a sheriff standing right there. Brenda's face went pale, and her clipboard actually slipped out of her hand and hit the sidewalk. Sheriff Alvarez turned slowly toward her and said very calmly, "You don't get to call this HOA business anymore." Brenda tried to speak, but all she managed was this thin shaking. I didn't. That wasn't supposed to." He cut her off. "Ma'am, step aside." The next day, the Homeowners Association called an emergency meeting at the community center because of course they did. Maple Ridge couldn't process tragedy without folding chairs and a sign-in sheet. Brenda walked in like she still thought she was in charge. Pink binder, perfect hair, that tight smile. Sheriff Alvarez was already there. So was the county tree officer. So was Ethan Brooks, the HOA landscaping coordinator. And he looked like a man who wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. Brenda cleared her throat and said, "This meeting will come to order." Sheriff Alvarez held up a hand. "No, sit down." The room froze. He placed a thick folder on the table and said, "Here's what we have: unauthorized entry, tampering with surveillance, illegal removal of a protected tree, misuse of homeowners association funds, and reckless endangerment that resulted in property damage." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to chew air. Ethan finally spoke, voice low. "She told us the permits were handled. She told us it was approved." The county officer slid a document forward. No permit was ever filed. Then the treasurer, a quiet older guy who looked like he'd been miserable for years, stood up and said, "And the payment for the contractor came from the HOA emergency fund." Without a vote, the room started murmuring. Angry, shocked, real. Brenda looked around like she expected people to save her, but no one moved. No one smiled back. Sheriff Alvarez said, "We're done pretending this is a misunderstanding." Ethan raised his hand and said, "I motion to remove Brenda Whitman as president." Every hand went up. "Fast," Brenda whispered. "You can't do this." Sheriff Alvarez leaned forward. "Watch us." She reached into her purse like she might pull out another form, another notice, another threat. But instead she just pulled out her keys with shaking fingers. And that's when it hit her. No clipboard, no authority, no noon emails, no protocol, just consequences. Brenda stood there for a second longer, staring at me like I was the problem she couldn't solve. Then she turned and walked out, swallowed by the same neighborhood she'd tried to rule. And I didn't follow her. I didn't say a word. Because the lesson was already loud enough. Power doesn't disappear when you beg for it back. It disappears when you document the truth and force it into the light.